Before this pandemic, dire warnings outline how vulnerable our complex global food system had become. One contribution to that conversation is the new book. It's called Uncertain Harvest: The Future of Food on a Warming Planet. And joining us to explain and tell us how COVID-19 now factors into it all, two of the co-authors. We welcome, in Gatineau, Quebec, Sarah Rotz. She is assistant professor in the Department of Social Sciences at York University. And from just outside Meaford, Ontario, Evan Fraser. He is the director of the Aral Food Institute at the University of Guelph and a Canada Research Chair in Global Food Security. And it's great to have you two on our program here tonight. Let's get started. You all have, all of you involved in this book, slightly different backgrounds on food. So I want to know how it all came together. Sarah, you want to start? How'd you all get together on this?
Well, I was just finishing my PhD with working with Evan, and we had been having conversations about how to move that into a postdoctoral, some postdoctoral work, and we were all really interested in furthering conversations around the intersection of food, land, agriculture, technology, and exploring some of the social and ethical consequences and impacts of agricultural technology in the not only in the context of Canada, but also more broadly across North America and globally. And so we extended those conversations with Ian Mosby, and things kind of went from there.
Ian's the third of the three amigos on this project. Evan, are you going to completely contradict that story, or what's your version?
Well, no, exactly. I mean, Sarah and I had a great time working, me as her supervisor and Sarah's a PhD student. And I'm not going to apologize. We butted heads on a bunch of things. We disagreed on a bunch of things, but we shared a common vision of a food system where everybody can eat justly, everyone can eat healthily, everyone can eat sustainably, nutritiously. But we sometimes disagreed on how we'd get there. And as we had these conversations, we started realizing that there were no simple answers, and that the only way to find solutions was to have conversations with opposing viewpoints. And so a historian, I'm going to characterize Sarah as an activist and a social scientist, and me as a bit more techno-optimistic, ended up having a 2-year conversation over the course of many chapters.
Cool. Well, here's part of one of your chapters. I'll read this so people who are following along on podcast can hear it as well. The complex web of imports and exports that makes up our current global food system looks a lot like the global banking system just before the 2008 crash. It's a system in which a few nations supply a disproportionate quantity of food to the rest of the world, in which a few major global transportation nodes facilitate much of the world's trade, in which 8 crops provides 3/4 of the world's calories, and in which a handful of multinational corporations control up to 90% of the world's grain trade. It doesn't take much to imagine a scenario in which something might happen. Evan, what's the something?
Well, I mean, we wrote that, and I'll be honest, I thought it was a little overblown when we wrote it, but I liked the perspective and I liked the prose, and then COVID happened, and we've seen the highly concentrated meat packing industry, specifically beef and pork, very much struggle to keep open while workers test positive for COVID. And we see this extraordinary situation where we realize that farmers in Canada are dependent on temporary foreign workers to come in, largely from Latin America and the Caribbean. And that's been thrown into disarray. And although the system has worked really, really hard to keep functioning and has done remarkably well in the short term, keeping us fed over the last 3 months, the last 3 months has revealed some serious vulnerabilities associated with the high level of concentration in the system.
But Sarah, even pre-pandemic, what was going on to the global food supply in terms of the impact of climate change, for example?
Yeah, I mean, in the opening of the book, we do talk about major disruptions, right? And while we didn't talk about COVID specifically, we did talk about the potential for climate change, war, political unrest, and what that could potentially do to our food system and some of the implications of that. And I think many folks would argue that the implications of that really look like disruptions in trade and disruptions in just absolute sort of food access, more production, basic constraints in terms of production. But what I think COVID has revealed is the degree of social and economic inequity that's baked into every step of our food system, and how that actually impacts our food system from all the way from the farm to literally from the farm to the fork, and how those inequities are sort of reveal themselves in situations not only like COVID, but they're going to come to the fore as climate change moves ahead. And I think it's really, really important also to point out that it's the same communities that were affected both in terms of labor issues and in terms of food insecurity. The same communities that were most deeply affected pre-COVID are the ones that are struggling more so during COVID. So that's both, precarious and migrant workers, but also more sort of on the food access end, that's Black and Indigenous communities. And we know that they have much higher rates of food insecurity than before COVID. For instance, Black folks are Black households and families are 3.5 times more likely to live in food insecure households than white folks. And so there's a real structural issue around food access and food production across the system.
I am curious, though, Evan, as you sat down to write that first, or either the first chapter, the introduction, wherever it was that I just plucked that quote out of, and you said, something could be coming down the road. I mean, did you really have any sense that it might be a global pandemic that would kind of give life to all of the concerns you were raising there?
Well, I guess the two ways of answering that is intellectually, yeah, I did. And people like Sarah and Ian and myself, other food commentators, have been writing about structural vulnerabilities in the food system for a long time. And my entire career, some way, has had that theme running through it. Emotionally, no. I really thought I was overblowing things, but we weren't. And I'd like to reinforce Sarah's point. One of the things that COVID has revealed to us is a deep irony, and that's the people who ultimately are most necessary at keeping our food system running. That's people stocking shelves at grocery stores and picking strawberries in fields and keeping meat packing plants going. They're also the ones that generally are the least well paid, and also most often the ones that have precarious employment or temporary foreign workers or whatnot. So there's this extraordinary irony that exposes the vulnerability and the inequity of the system, which I think we need to highlight here.
Sarah, what do you think more of us know now about how essential migrant workers are to our entire food system that perhaps we didn't know 4 months ago?
How deeply reliant we are. So over the last maybe 40 or 50 years, we have expanded the seasonal agricultural worker system by, we've quadrupled it in the past 20 years. So that's a big increase. And then not only in the fields, but also in the factories, we see in the JBS plant, the Cargill plant, there is a huge increase in the integration, the use of migrant farm workers. And I think another thing that people are also becoming more aware of is the ways in which the system itself has sort of set the conditions up for migrant workers, again, both on the fields and in the factories, to have very few options in terms of being able to ask for time off, being able to receive social and healthcare supports, being able to just say no, right, when conditions don't feel safe or healthy. And so the system itself of industrialization and corporate concentration, we have 3 or 4 plants in Canada that make up the vast majority of meat processing. And so there's a level of concentration that actually doesn't really make things accessible in terms of different kinds of job options for farmers and for farm workers and factory workers. So they're they're forced into a situation with very, very few options, and also alongside a situation with very few supports. And I think COVID is really revealing the conditions. You know, we've seen really great work by investigative journalists going in, actually the courage of many workers themselves, showing the world what the conditions are and speaking out over and over again amid amid a lot of backlash. And these protests have been happening, and that kind of speaking out has been happening for a really long time. But I think just now, that is one thing that that has shifted a bit. I think that audiences are really, Canadians are really starting to see the conditions firsthand in a way that we haven't really done before.
And Evan, from the farmers and from the consumer's point of view, do we assume that there is going to be a significant amount of crop that will simply not be harvested on our farms this year?
Oh gosh. Well, I think unfortunately, and there has been a tremendous amount of waste as a result of supply chains having to reorganize as restaurants have closed, as farmers have struggled to get access to the labor that they need. The farmers that I'm talking to are suggesting significant harvest declines this year, and that's with Herculean efforts. And I guess I should also preface my comments by saying thank you to everybody that's working in the food system right now. I think it's remarkable how well it has functioned. As Sarah just articulated, there are deep structural problems that we have to maybe take this opportunity to address, but we also should celebrate, I think, a remarkable accomplishment of keeping things going as well as they have been over the last 10 weeks, and also saying, wow, there's a tremendous amount of waste in the system right now, and farmers are really going to struggle getting their crops off this year. Vegetables in particular are vulnerable. The extent to which the livestock industries had to cull animals because the packing plants have closed. It's very, very challenging times for farmers, for farm workers. Yeah.
I do wonder, though, Evan. I mean, I get emails all the time from, for example, people representing post-secondary university and college students whose jobs that they had planned to occupy this summer have disappeared because of what's happened to our economy. And yet here we have agricultural jobs that are going vacant because of the situation we've just described. Is there a potential match there for these either, unemployed students or students whose jobs have disappeared to assume these jobs that are now unfilled?
So I get that question a lot, Steve, as well. And the short answer is yes, but not probably in fast enough for this summer. We have to realize that these aren't, quote, unskilled jobs. Pruning an apple orchard, harvesting asparagus. These are jobs that are quite skilled, and the Canadian youth, who is often being identified as the people that should do these jobs, have other skills. They have skills. For instance, my son's a lifeguard. He's trained as a lifeguard. He's not trained as an asparagus picker, and so it's a little naive, I think, to assume that unemployed Canadian youth can just simply slot into the workforce of the agricultural workforce. With that said, I mean, the government just announced that last week, I believe, a big skills training matching opportunity. I think there's a huge opportunity, not perhaps this summer because the farmers need the work now, but in the fullness of time and next summer perhaps to develop a domestic skill set that is suitable for this job, and that may be an exciting opportunity that emerges out of COVID-19. And so I think that that's a good medium-term solution. But the other thing we have to remember, though, is although the jobs perhaps for agriculture, for temporary foreign workers aren't great, as Sarah just articulated, a huge amount of the money folks from, say, Latin America and Caribbean earn in Canadian farms, they send back home and support families at home. And so there's an issue of what happens to those families when those remittances, is what this form of funding is called, when those remittances dry up. And that becomes a really tough issue to disentangle.
Now, Sarah, that's interesting because the explanation that I have often been given is that Canadian-born students are not going to want to do these agricultural jobs because they think the jobs are either beneath them, or they're not interested in them, or they're too tough for them, or whatever. But the notion that they just don't have the skills to do them is not an argument I have heard yet. So that's interesting. What do you think that says about the nature of this business that we, again, 4 months ago, didn't know?
Yeah, I've heard that very much from farmers and farm workers alike, saying, in fact, this is some of the in many ways, it's incredibly skilled work. It requires a lot of precision, but also the conditions, again, are very difficult. Long hours. A lot of farm workers are working 6 days a week, 12-hour days, and very much underpaid. And so, again, I think we need to consider the larger conditions that make it such that maybe a 17-year-old student might not only might not be interested in being able to do it, but they don't have the experience, right? We often don't really have that conversation about the experience and skills required, because in fact, a lot of migrant farm workers have been doing farm work and have in many cases owned and managed their own farms back home for a very long time. So I think it's really important that we have that conversation about skilled work, and also have a conversation about why it is that farm workers and factory workers are so undervalued and underpaid, right? And I think that, again, goes very much back to the larger issues around the industries that have grown surrounding farming. And so farmers themselves have spent decades on a sort of razor's edge of income. And their incomes have been very, very slim, because the cost of their production, their input costs, have consistently risen, while the prices of the commodities or the crops that they grow have been remained fairly stagnant over the years. So this situation of sort of being squeezed at both ends has made it such that some of the few options that they have is really to try and underpay farm workers, or try and what a lot of folks talk about in terms of mining the soil, to try and get the most that they can, the most crop out of every inch of their soil. And so farmers themselves, I think, are left with few options within this larger system and model of agriculture and agricultural production.
In which case, Evan, in our remaining moments here, let's figure out if the goal is to make a food system that is more resilient to future shocks, unpredictable events, who knows, future pandemics, God forbid. Throw some ideas at us. What do we need to know?
Well, my guess is that there will be some technologies that folks get really excited about that shorten supply chains and create more bioregionalism. And some of that will be done at the sort of the farm level by managing the ecosystems more efficiently. Some might call that agroecological farming. I think in addition to that, there will be a strong interest in things like vertical farming and cellular agriculture, these sort of high-tech options that bring agriculture closer to home. Every single one of these strategies definitely has trade-offs, but I have a feeling that we're at a moment where we've adopted a just-in-time approach, which is highly efficient and brings food just in time to the consumer with very little redundancy. And some of the farm communities that I've been talking about have been suggesting we need to move to a just-in-case approach, where our food system is built just in case bad things happen, and that will probably result in higher costs because that's almost inevitable. So we have to be very careful about these conversations, that we don't run into a food security problem if food becomes more expensive and out of the reach of low income folks. But I think that these technologies plus good policies around social welfare could combine to create a more resilient food system.
And is it your view that large multinationals, which you referenced in that introduction to your book, the large conglomerates, are they likely to be part of the solution or part of the problem to getting to that more resilient system you just described?
Well, I think this is probably a place where Sarah and I might agree to disagree. My own feeling is that the large multinational system is here to stay and brings us a lot of benefits, but also some challenges. And I work actively and supportively with multinationals in order to ensure that system is as good as possible. But I acknowledge that there's a wide range of opinions, and I'll let Sarah have the last word.
Well, Sarah, if you can do it in 30 seconds, because that's all we've got left, go ahead, share your concerns.
Well, I do think that government does need to sort of stop paying companies to solve problems, especially social and ecological ones. So I do think that money and supports need to be going directly to people, to workers, to vulnerable communities, marginalized communities. That's really where, especially public money needs to be directed there rather than to be used as supports or incentives for companies to engage in particular practices. I don't think that that's maybe the best use of public money. So social supports and direct investment in basic income and housing support and childcare and things like that, alongside incentives for farmers to make ecologically sustainable decisions and getting more agroecological farmers on the land. I do think that that's a better way forward.
Well, you two given us both a lot to think about, and I kind of enjoy watching you two disagree, you two co-authors. So that's kind of fun too. Sarah Rotz and Evan Fraser, it's good to have you on TVO tonight. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
The Agenda with Steve Paikin is brought to you by the Chartered Professional Accountants of Ontario. CPA Ontario is a regulator, an educator, a thought leader, and an advocate. We protect the public. We advance our profession. We guide our CPAs. We are CPA Ontario. And by viewers like you. Thank you.